Hello and welcome to GPS News, news for exactly where you are. I'm your host, Eric King.
And I'm Daryl Gaddis, and these are some of the top stories for this week.
We have some important news regarding personal finance for our generation, specifically regarding student loans, as well as some important news for those generations ahead of us who are looking towards retirement.
We'll also have some helpful advice about debt from an expert, a health minute, this week in history, and top stories around the nation.
But we'll start off with a story that's near and dear on everyone's heart right now. The recent mudslides that have occurred in California that are right on the heels of devastating record-breaking wildfires.
Turn around! The flash flood's right there!
This is the moment.
Get out of here! Go!
The force of nature arrived.
Oh my God, Mom!
People think of water like a river. You wouldn't last 2 seconds. It's a blender of huge 50-foot logs and 5-foot by 5-foot boulders grinding.
Somehow, Marco Farrell and his family escaped what so many others could not outrun.
I don't know how anyone can survive this.
After searching for his mom, Josie, Hayden Gower learned her body was recovered overnight. Diane Brewer lost her best friend.
I never could imagine such a scene.
From above, it looks like a war zone. The Coast Guard plucking families, even pets, where search teams on the ground could not reach them.
They've been in the air here now 3 days, but now no sign of survivors. Just a mud flow from the mountains all the way into the ocean.
The shoreline marred with debris. Highway 101 shut down into next week.
Hey, Oprah, how are you?
Montecito's famous residents grateful for what they still have.
I am going to do whatever I can for the rest of the community.
There's been more than 100 rescues. Inga Gilbar carried out of her home by firefighters when mud poured in.
We had no idea what a flash flood was until I saw this torrent, raging river coming down with cars and rocks.
Tonight, the mudslide may be over, but so much of what's been carried away will never come back.
In an article from the Associated Press entitled "Window Closing for California Mudslide Searchers as Death Toll Rises to 18, officials said secondary searches of damaged structures were underway. The number of missing has fluctuated as people have been located, but according to the Santa Barbara Sheriff's Office, as of Thursday, there are still 43 people that were unaccounted for. Residents in some areas were subject to mandatory evacuations this Friday, emergency officials said, and our prayers and thoughts will be with their family as they continue to search for more victims. And then some more news that affects the generation just ahead of us, but we definitely need to keep an eye on. An article from the New York Daily News entitled "The Looming Pension Crisis Will Hurt Many African Americans." State and local government employment has been a bright spot for African Americans, though the data does not fully align with the Bureau of Labor Statistics figures. According to the EEOC, in 2015, African Americans held 18.5% of all state and local government jobs, despite representing just over 13% of the total U.S. population. This follows a consistent pattern of African American employment by state and local government. In 2005, African Americans held 18.9% of state and local government jobs. These jobs in particular were a particular boon for the African American community who was lagged behind in other employment statistics, and specifically it was a help for African American women. However, as the pension crisis and underfunding has begun to affect more and more states, we'll see that because of the larger percentage of African Americans that work for the state and government, those will be the ones that will be more disproportionately affected. So this is something that we definitely need to keep our eye on in the future. Like I said, it's for the generation above us. However, we're right on the heels of that. So on the one hand, this has been a great thing on the front end for African Americans working for the government. We may see that it may turn around to bite them in the back as they go towards retirement time. But again, like I said, this is a story we'll have to keep an eye on. And following up on that story, we're about to hear some advice from an expert by the name of Chris Hogan. He's with Ramsey Financial Solutions, and he has some great advice for us on how we should start to look at our finances going forward, as well as debt in the future.
Welcome back. Retirement realities. 37% of Gen Xers say that they cannot afford to stop working and fully retire someday, according to a new survey from TD Ameritrade. Joining us right now to talk about it is Ramsey Solutions financial expert and author of Retire Inspired, Chris Hogan. Chris, good to see you. Thanks so much for joining us.
Well, thank you very much. It's good to be with you.
Does this surprise you?
No, it really doesn't.
No, I didn't think so.
Actually, Maria, I look at this and I think these numbers are low. I'm traveling all around the country talking to people, and as I talk with them, I realize they don't understand. They don't understand what's at stake, and they don't know what to do. I mean, we've got 17%, according to this survey, aren't saving anything, right? We've got 49% that know that they're behind. I think those numbers are higher, and people need to wake up and get more serious about this topic.
Bob.
Hey, Chris, Bob Nardelli here. Do you think the increase in credit card use in November, because the consumer was anticipating this new tax law, and they figured, okay, I'll spend now and then I'll pay it off later. Last time we saw one of these tax breaks, a lot of it went into savings as opposed to reducing debt or accelerating, spending in the marketplace, Chris.
I don't think the credit card debt that we went into in Americans as a whole in November, $28 billion, had anything to do with the tax plan. What I think it has to do with is dependence. Americans have developed this appetite for debt, and it's in epidemic proportions. We have this mentality of, I'll just get it now and deal with it later. The problem is that people are going to be paying off holiday spending in July and August of this year. So what we have to do is start to help people to understand debt is not your friend. It's a thief. It steals from you now, and it makes you pay later. So get intentional with this and start to understand debt's not your friend. We have to attack it and get it out of our lives.
Yeah,
And now for our health minute. We're going to be talking about aloe vera juice and or aloe vera water. It says that a body with an acidic pH is a breeding ground for disease, and it's an atmosphere where illness thrives. Help keep your body balanced by eating and drinking alkaline foods and beverages, such as aloe vera juice. Other smart alkaline food choices would be leafy vegetables or leafy greens, rich vegetables, citrus, nuts, and seeds, apple cider vinegar, which is a big thing nowadays, and last but not least, coconut vinegar, which most people don't know about. So, with that said, it's not about me, it's about your body's alkalinity.
All right, let's get to the real story everyone wants to talk about. It was on everyone's lips, on everyone's television for the past week. Oprah 2020. I can hear the boos and the jeers at the same time, But seriously, this is something that's gaining some traction, and I believe it's kind of a function of our celebrity culture right now, being the fact that our current president is a celebrity. It only seems, not beyond the pale, to say the least, that we could have another celebrity right on the heels of it. But according to a Marist poll from PBS, that's not exactly the sentiment of the rest of America. So though celebrity culture may be pushing it, the average everyday American doesn't seem too excited about a prospect of having Oprah as president in 2020. In fact, according to a Marist poll done by PBS, about 1,300 people were surveyed, and in response to the question, do you want Oprah Winfrey to run for president in 2020 or not, only 35% of those surveyed said yes, as opposed to 54 no's and 11 undecided. Now, to be fair, she did score more favorably than our current president, Donald J. Trump. However, that's not really saying too much. With opinion polls kind of in the toilet and a controversial presidency, to say the least, it's not beyond the pale that anybody, including myself, my co-host, or the man behind the camera right now, probably has a good shot of running against Donald Trump and winning. So, however, this is a big story. It's kind of intriguing, and being originally from Chicago myself, I grew up on Oprah. So I can't lie, the idea of it and her voice sounds very comforting to me. However, in reality, I really don't think that's a good idea. So again, this is maybe more of an opinion piece than a news story, but that's kind of the world we live in today. Everyone has an opinion, everyone has a Twitter and a Snapchat, and one simple little Golden Globes piece can all of a sudden put you into the leading candidacy for the United States presidency. That's a scary thought.
And now for social media trends. We're going to talk a little bit about Snapchat and how it is being used as a drug dealing app, as well as a great place for prostitutes to make themselves available. On November 18th, 2014, Snapcash was introduced. It allows for users to transfer money from their bank accounts to another user's bank account. So basically, what's going on is prostitution and drug dealing via Snapchat. A couple of comments that I found sound like this. I support legalization of prostitution, so thanks, Snapchat. Another comment that I found was, you might as well call it a drug dealing app. Just because people can freely transfer money between each other doesn't mean that it is not recorded. With that said, I'm a little uneasy about people using Snapchat for prostitution and dealing drugs.
On this edition of This Week in History, we're going to take a look at an organization that's no longer around. However, it paved the way for one of the largest and most influential organizations in the world today. On January 10th, 1920, the Covenant of the League of Nations was ratified by 42 different countries. And what sparked it was on the heels of World War I, with the assassinations and the loss of life, the death on a grand scale, and pretty much at that point the most costly war ever fought. Advocates and world leaders like our president at the time, Woodrow Wilson, advocated that nations come together to try to form a consensus, a collaborative effort to bring an end to these wars that were getting increasingly more costly as time went on. They did have a track record of some success, however, very little influence, and in 1946, the League was officially dissolved, and again, it paved the way for an organization we all know today, which is a little bit more powerful, the United Nations, who also, this week in 1946, came about. And we see in the news today the United Nations having a big impact all across the world, some for good, other ones have other opinions about it. However, it is more influential today, and the League of Nations, they paved the way for it. Even if we don't always agree, we can see how history still affects us today. On this edition of Changing the Narrative, we're going to look at who's looking out for you and me, the average everyday person out there just trying to live our lives and live the American dream, as they say.
Looking at studentloanhero.com, 2018, and Americans are more burdened by student loan debt than ever. It says here, you've probably heard the statistic, Americans owe over $1.48 trillion in student loan debt, spread among about 44 million borrowers. That's about $620 billion more than the total U.S. credit card debt. In fact, the average class of 2016 graduate has $37,172 in student loan debt, up 6% from last year.
Now that is a staggering total. That's sticker shock. It'll put anybody on their back seat. As probably many of you out there. I have student loans as well. Did everything they told me to do. Went to school, had to borrow to do it, came out, graduated, even got a little bit of a job. But as we can see, that as that debt and that burden gets heavier and heavier, it's going to drag us down throughout time. And don't forget earlier in our segment the advice we got from our expert about exactly what debt is. But I'm happy to report that there are people out there that are trying to do something about it, specifically from our generation. The Philly-born Sonia Lewis is known also as the student loan doctor. And in an article on HelloBeautiful.com, she started a company to help student loan debt relief called the Student Loan Doctor LLC. According to her, who's also getting her doctorate degree right now, her dissertation that she's writing it on is on how student loan debt disproportionately affects African American, and African American women are affected most of all because they get the most degrees. It's no secret that among the U.S. population, African American women go to school at a higher percentage than any other group, and so while that is a good thing in economic terms, educational terms, for the future earning prospects, what it has done is in the temporary and in the meantime, in between time, has saddled that particular group with a disproportionate amount of that student loan debt burden. And anytime you have $1.5 trillion of anything out there, it's a definite it's a boon not just on our generation, but the generation after us and the future to come. So it's something that we'll definitely keep an eye on. However, I encourage you to check out her podcast, again, Sonia Lewis, and she's also a student loan doctor, LLC. So I encourage everybody who's in those situations, struggling with it, to go ahead and reach out for help, because it's something that we all have to deal with here in this great U.S. of A.
It's that time. It's time for the word of the day. The word of the day is Loquacious.
Loquacious.
Not loquacia.
Not her.
Loquacious.
Loquacious. And loquacious, it's an adjective which means tending to talk a great deal or talkative. And so, as we sign off here as your co-host, my name is Eric King.
My name is Daryl Geddes.
And we're signing off with our loquacious selves.
Yes.
We'll see you next week. Thank you all for joining us. And let your heart not be troubled.
Neither let it be afraid.